Hey everybody, my name is Stefan Kraus from Byte to Bytes and welcome to another Let's Create tutorial series. And we're going to create a terrain or a landscape or scenery, as you can see here on this terrain. So this time I'm going to do a slightly different compared to the other ones, because I really like how this one turned out. And I'm not exactly sure if I could just exactly recreate exactly the same thing as you can see here, because often it's like if you're creating a video and you're showing every step by step, importing models, setting the setups and setting up the values and all that. It sometimes turns out to be different. But I really like what I have here, so I decided, and also to keep the video a little bit shorter, because the other ones are really huge ones, and look at and take a look a lot of time until the end. I thought I'd do it reverse, like I show you the full setup, and then we're just enabling layer after layer, so you can see how this terrain builds up from scratch. You will have enough time to see the settings, and by the way, you can also stop the video anytime. Taking the settings from my view here and bring it over to your own terrain. So you should be pretty easy to recreate exactly the same terrain on your end too. So we're going to create that one here, and you can see I have set up here basically 3 biomes, and there's another one. There's a 4th biome which is called just empty. It just has nothing, just a default material. This would be exactly the same as what you will see regarding rendering when you run World Creator and start a new project. And I'm now going to disable everything so we can start from scratch, and then enable one layer after another so you can follow me step by step. Okay, so I'm disabling first every single biome here. I'm taking away that path layer here and my debris, and I'm turning off my water. So this is my initial terrain. You can see this is a 2K terrain with 1 meter precision, base noise settings, the shape settings, so nothing really fancy. I think this is even the original settings that I've done, or that is basically the one that you see when you create a new project, except that we're, instead of using a 1K terrain, we're using now a 2K terrain. The next thing is, to create that scene, I have added a path. So the basic idea was to have a nice river flow, doing some rocks, doing some water, and doing a forest around that river, and making that as procedural as only possible. So each time I'm changing my river or changing my terrain in size and dimensions and whatever, it adapts 100% automatically. Okay, so you don't have to do a lot, but you can create many different variations out of it. So adding a path should also be quite common to you. I think if you go to shape layers and click here plus icon, you can choose whatever layer you want to really add, and in this case I've just added a path layer like that here. Then you click on edit, and then if you're holding the left shift key and press things on your terrain and outside the terrain, you can create that path, you can move that path, you can add new points to it and all that. Because when adding a point to a path, basically it adds on top of the current elevation that you've selected. So what I've done for this river, I have flattened everything down, and then I moved it slightly up like that. I increased a little bit the width, and I increased the fall off. I used a noise strength here to do some noise around it, and then I just did nothing else but adjusting a little bit that path here to get something like this. Okay, so that's all I've done with the path. Nothing really fancy. The most important thing that you need to be aware is, don't work on a very high level step, because if you're increasing the level high step, you see the path is getting really high accurate. So this is mostly just for streets and roads and all that, but not for real rivers or something. So lower levels will give you a much better blending with the surrounding terrain than higher levels. Okay, so I'm deleting this path because I already had one, and it's just like this. Okay, so you can see the path is a little bit longer because I'm going to show you how this terrain adapts afterwards, once we've created everything here, even with larger terrains in real time, and even if you change the path, everything adapts automatically in real time in World Creator. That's one of the core features, is the pure real-time generator that really instantly changes everything and adapts everything while designing your terrain. Okay, so that's my path here. The next thing is I've added a debris layer, so a debris simulation. Again here, I just extended it because I'm going to show you the 4K terrain version as well. To do a debris simulation, just go here to the simulation layer, go to plus, click on debris, and the debris is added here. You can instantly see how things changing, what this simulation actually does. So it adds these smaller debris-like stuff on your terrain. In this case, I'm handling them as smaller terrain bulbs because terrain is not always just very smooth. You got very small peaks and bulbs on the terrain. And I'm not going through everything here, so I would just suggest just to check my settings here and then copy them over to your own project. So the core changes are the density here. I'm using a higher density for the very high level steps. That way I'm only telling World Creator to use smaller points. For example, if I'm increasing the lower level steps, then I'm creating larger rock stuff like so, but I want to have smaller ones, so I'm using the higher level steps only. And then the density was adapted. That would be, I think this is the default density. I've pushed it to a maximum like this. We could even go higher if you enable unstable density like that, and then you can move that slider to whatever you want to have. And World Creator is now actually internally creating tons of millions of particles that just fall on the terrain and spread over it. But we're good enough with the with the unstable density disabled, using a pretty high density value here. Then for the simulation settings, these is for delta, for friction, acceleration, collision bounce. Use a higher insertion level. In this case, mine one is 11. Align to normal always makes a lot of sense, else it just sticks on the terrain, as you can see here. I don't like that too much, so I prefer aligning it to this terrain. And I increase a little bit the height. So this would be the default height. Go up to 1.5, like here. And use some different sizes as well as you want. It's a range, size range between 0.25 and 0.26. 65. Yeah, I'm not going to use any sort of gradient appliement here, so just coloring it white, because I'm going to use a material for the debris. So I will show you this in a few seconds. Okay, so this is my shape in general. So actually, I'm not further manipulating the shape itself. I'm not using filters, nothing. But what I need to do is I'm adding I'm going to create a biome. You can do that here. Go to the plus icon, add a biome, and then you can name it and all that. You can add filters, materials, and objects and such. So I added a biome, called it path edge. And now let me quickly just disable a few things here so we can continue to do everything step by step, okay? So the very first thing that we need to do is to tell the system, tell World Creator, that we want the biome to be only applied where the path is. And that is really easy to do. All you need to do is go to the shape layers here, use your path, and drag and drop that into that distribution here, okay? Once you drag and drop it, it will appear here like that, and nothing will change because you don't have materials nor objects, anything applied. It just tells that this biome is now bound to a path, and that the biome is going to use the path heat map, which is this one, to apply all filters, all materials, and all objects. So that way we just apply the biome to that path. The next thing is, what I want to do here is, because it's called path edge, I want to make sure that I'm now working on the edge side here of my path. So I'm not going inside my path, the inner part, but only the edge part. And that's really easy to do. If you open up the path here in distributions and the effects, go to plus, and then just call the edge effect, it creates this. Okay. And with the edge distance, you can control a little bit how the distance should be. With the edge strength, you can control how strong the edge effect should be applied at all. I like it if it's not 100% accurate. So like it should have some, you know, some things here inside, and all these things that you can see here, they appear because the path itself has a noise strength. So if I'm basically reducing the noise strength, the edge would look different. Okay. Yeah. So let's switch back to the original value as this. So here we go. Now that we have added the path to the distributions of my biome, we can now start to work out things. And as we work out things, you will see how that distribution of the path appears on the terrain. So we start to add a texture, a material, which has some grass and some leaves, but mostly leaves. I'm choosing, typically I'm choosing zip packages. I love to encode my materials or my textures inside a zip archive, and then correctly name them like diffuse or albedo or displacement and all that. There will be a detailed explanation about that new material package sort of things here in the documentation, because it's beta. We haven't added it yet to the documentation, so this is coming up. Or you just choose a set. At that point, you can, you know, drag and drop all the textures one by one for the albedo, for the displacement, and all that, yeah, you know, create a custom texture set. So for this one, let me quickly enable this. You'll see now how that texture or that material is now only applied of the edge of my path, and that biome is only applied where the path is being described. So these are my settings here. What I'm doing mostly, or the biggest change, was like using a tile size of 40. Typically it's 1. So it would be look like that here. I don't like that because we're doing a very large scale terrain. So we need to increase a little bit the realism here. Let's take it 40, and we're good to go. So in this case, if you're placing a mannequin like that, it's not really matching the terrain size, right? So in that case, you would have to adjust your mannequin. Let me see, that was here under, where is it? Where is it? That's the only thing I can't find that much. I need to change it because here's my reference object. So you find it under scene reference object. So you would increase a mannequin until it looks to something like this, I guess. Maybe it's a bit too large, maybe something like that here. So that would be my scale reference for this river flow, maybe a little bit larger as well. So, okay, so that way we could have a nice reference just for scaling up the thing. So I put my mannequin a little bit away here so we can fully concentrate on that part here. So my tile size is 40. I enable tree planar projection and stochastic distribution, mainly stochastic distribution to prevent visible tiling. Using height blending makes sense. We can use displacement enabled, but displacement is not yet activated. I'm going to activate it later so you can see a full displacement activated terrain as well. Okay, now comes the next. What I wanted to do is mixing up a little bit of more materials to reduce, let's say give it a higher diversity along the texturing thing. So I added a grass and rocks. So this is a mix of rocks and some grass here. If I enable it, you can see that instantly what's going to change. Let me show you. Disabled, enabled. And I used here a little bit kind of lower color shading, so it matches better with my underground, with the underlying texture. I used a higher tile size. We don't need that. We can use a exactly the same tile size here. And everything else is actually just the same. Tree planar, stochastic, height blending, everything is just set exactly the same as this one. But the difference is that we're not applying that texture or that material everywhere on the terrain, because if we would do so, it just would override the underlying material. So we need to do some distribution, and I used a simplex distribution here that looks like this. This would be my values for my simplex, so you can copy that. And most important is I added a contrast, because without the contrast the simplex would look like this, and with the contrast it looks like this. So if you add a contrast effect, here go to effects, click add contrast effect, and if you're increasing the contrast value here to a maximum, you can create sharper edges. And the more you add of this one, the sharper the edges will be, and currently depending on the resolution of your terrain. So the resolution is like 1 meter is the precision. If I'm increasing the precision, I would have a higher resolution for the entire texturing, and the higher the resolution, the higher, of course, also the edges if I add another contrast. And that way I used these settings here now to apply that material on top of the other. So we get a variation. And now comes the next real cool thing. I wanted now to add a rock texture. So add some rocks, but only where the simulation appears. So only where these small bumps here on the terrain are. Remember, the simulation, it's here, my debris simulation. I want to color it using a texture. So that is done pretty simple. So add a texture like that, like a material like this. These are my settings. Again, tile size same, everything is else is exactly the same, except the distribution. Just drag and drop this debris into the distribution here. World Creator is going to create a simulation distribution and mark this debris here as the underground, or let's say the weight map for that. So what we get is this one. So to remember, without and with. So you can see these rocks here, okay? That's pretty cool. So that way we're mixing in some rocks, plus some grass, plus some stones and whatever, and of course leaves and all that stuff. So we get some pretty nice texturing here for our edge of our river flow here. Okay, so now we're coming to the more important part, is let's place some objects. So the very first thing I added was like, okay, let's add some grass. I think that's always like the very basic things that we need to do. Add some grass here, but always remember, grass typically wouldn't grow on higher slopes. I don't know, and we need to do a kind of variations. So add some sort of grass objects. When I'm adding objects, I'm always playing with a little bit of scale range, because I don't want to be, I don't want each of these instances to be at exactly the same size. So varying a little bit in size makes the scene more realistic. Playing around with the height offset, normal offset might do this as well. And of course, this really depends on what kind of object you are adding to your project. So don't take these one as reference directly, because this really varies from object to object. But what I typically do is, if you're loading an object, there's a material list. So each object has a couple of materials, and I'm always trying to adapt a little bit, the coloring of the objects and everything else, so it matches better with the underground textures. So typically you could, for instance, you could tint these objects a little bit. You could, for example, enable a gradient for them, like that. Choose a gradient, whatever. You can do some sort of terrain blending, which means World Creator is going to blend the underground part here of the object using the terrain color of the object. That might make a lot of sense as well. And don't forget, you need to do this for every single material of that object, okay? Because in this case, this grass consists of 4 materials. So if I change, for example, let me change this one, the tint here, for that one, you can see only some of those grass blades being affected directly. So to affect them, every single grass blade, you need to choose the objects here, the materials from the material list and adapt them. Then I told World Creator to apply that object only along a specific slope. Let's enable our heat map so you can see that. Not much slope here. At higher slopes, don't apply that at higher slopes. I used a simplex noise again, because I don't want to have all these spread everywhere on my terrain. And of course, most times, or let's say almost every time when I'm using noise, I'm doing contrast, okay? So it really depends on how you want to do that. So this is a lot of tweaking and seeing what looks better, what looks best, what's your personal favorite. Okay, so I added grass. So the next one was, okay, let's go and add some grass. It should be a little bit along the river again, and should be more like what is called, I don't know what it's called. It's like thin grass that grows just straight up. That's typically grass that goes out of a river or something, out of the water. It just goes straight upwards. So I did that one here too. Again, I was using simplex and slopes. You can see my simplex value. You can see my slope values. Simplex again with contrast as usual. And my grass here playing a lot with the distance between the instances. So higher distance means less grass. Lower distances means you're putting in a lot more grass. Do non-uniform scaling here. Also good. I'm using a gradient for that one here too. So the gradient basically is used to procedural color each grass instance differently depending on position and all that. That makes a lot of sense. Then I was adding a bush. That's how these bushes would look like. Again, slope at my Perlin settings here. No sub-objects for my bush. This would be the settings. So I'm using a higher instance distance just to indicate I don't want to have too many bushes around it. That would be the case, but well, actually it doesn't look bad too. But I liked it how it was previously. So less bushes. Playing with the scales a little bit, so don't have equal bushes all around. Again, using some tint options here. You could also use some gradient. So again, this really depends on your model, of the coloring of your model. Then I add another bush, which is, let me see, it's that one here. Let's check with and without. So smaller ones. Again, using slope and Perlin. These would be these settings here. And then we're coming to more important things, or let's say more interesting things. So I added a rock like that. And that rock, what's interesting about this, again, we have slope, but we're not using a noise, we're using the cavity. So what I wanted to simulate a little bit is like the cavity goes in between erosion lines, typically like this. So I'm telling the system, spread it more within the areas of erosion lines, but only on lower slope levels. No, not very high slope levels. Combining these together results in something like this here. And so this is my slope value, this is my cavity values. You need to switch to concave. So if you're choosing convex, it means it's at the edges of the erosion lines. If you choose concave, it goes in between. And because I want to fill up the scene a lot more, I'm using sub-objects. So sub-objects, just drag and drop an object in it, and that will be the difference. So this would be my rock, my native rock that I've added. If enabling the sub-objects, then objects are being created around that rock. And this can be controlled here with the radius. If you go to sub-objects, using the radius here, you can see what's going to happen. So this is what is really happening here. And that way we can control a little bit the amount, the density. We could do a different seed. We can control at which distance of the original rock those sub-objects should be spreaded. And each sub-object has also a percentage, which would mean if you would add like 5 sub-objects, you can define and tell World Creator about the percentage at which the sub-objects should be added along to that object, okay? Yeah, again, playing with the scale range here. So these are basically the same settings as previously just like with the original objects as well. Okay, now I decided to add another rock, but it should be a larger one. It should be like these ones here. Filling up the scene furthermore with rocks. And again with a slope, but using a different noise. It's called phaser. You can see that. That way it looks a little bit different compared to Perlin, because I wanted to slightly do following along the river a little bit and doing like streaks of rocks, not just random rocks, but a streak of kind of rocks that could be placed. I'm pretty sure I could have achieved just the same exactly nice stuff with Perlin or with Simplex, but for this I have less values for this for the phaser, and that way I'm pretty sure not much rocks will be placed here at that point. Okay. Yeah, for the rock here, these will be my rock settings, having a higher instance distance again, playing a little bit with the scale ranges. I scale that rock to a very high scale value, and I do some terrain blending. So let me show you how terrain blending looks like. Let me go over here. So if I'm doing terrain blending, then you can see that here along these edges, right? So you can see that here, if I'm increasing that, it blends the underlying terrain color with that object. We don't need to do it pretty much, maybe something like this. And that way, it makes just sure that it really fits to the scene. It's not very hard edged, different coloring, all that. It looks like as if it would be part of the terrain itself a little bit, mixing it pretty nice. So this is really cool. I really like that. In a later iteration of another version of World Creator, we're going to even manipulating the terrain elevation, which means it's going to add some sand in between, or some debris or whatever, elevating a little bit to terrain, so it mixes up and matches up pretty perfect, just like in Unreal, which I liked very much when I saw that in the Unreal Engine. I really like that, so we are going to take that effect as well. Yeah, so then I choose to, and that's pretty nice now what's going to happen. What I want to do is spreading really a lot of large rocks here at higher slope values along the river line. So to achieve that, because look at this, it looks kind of naked. I don't know, it's, you know, it's not really realistic, because if these parts typically would have been overhangs a little bit with rocky cliffs and all that stuff, but we can't do that because we're working on a 2D height map. Even if we would do a vector displacement based on a height map, it wouldn't work if you're exporting that data, because the tool that you would export into would have to support that feature as well. And that's pretty difficult to achieve sometimes. So in this case, we're playing a lot with models. So I'm now enabling the big rock, so you can see the difference very quickly. So that's what I wanted to achieve, exactly this kind of effect here, which now looks way more realistic than before. Okay, so how did I do that? The very first thing is I'm using the slope value again. So I'm telling this system here to only apply it at very high slopes only. Then I'm using a Perlin. In this case, I could have left the Perlin. What I wanted to achieve basically was like not covering everything, just portions. So something like this here. But then I felt it's not perfect. So basically we could just leave the purlin or just have the purlin apply with a high amplitude. Doesn't matter. It would be more high performant if you would just remove the purlin here, but I will keep it in because I'm not sure if I could adjust it later afterwards a little bit and maybe have some naked parts as well. Maybe that would fit. And that's the more important part, is you need to scale your model to a very high level, and you need to spread a lot of instances. That would be with less instances, will result in something like this. But we need to tell World Creator that each distance should be very, very small, because that way these models are overlapping each other. And if we then do a scale range, then you have like smaller ones, you got larger ones, you got some real large ones, and that we can mix them in together and they will look pretty amazing. Yeah, and I additionally added some sub-object. Basically, I used the same model for this sub-object here as well, just to keep the norm a little bit. You can see that here. And I enabled also, I think here, where is it? I enabled terrain blending for the smaller objects. You can see that here. It blends currently white because we have set up the biome for this part here as well. So it does a nice blending with the terrain as well. Looks great. Fantastic. Now, this is our first biome. And now to understand what it means if the path is bound to that biome again, if I go here to the path, and now let me show you if I'm going to edit it in whatever way, like I'm moving it like this, World Creator is going to entirely manage everything for me. So it really applies along the edges of my river flow, all the objects that I've created, and sets up the scene 100% perfect. It's really awesome. And it does it in real time. Okay, so it doesn't really matter if you go up to, no. If you go up to a 4K terrain like that, it doesn't matter. World Creator is doing this really entirely in real time. Look at that. That's completely insane. Okay, let's switch back to our original shape, which looked like that. And now let's see what we can do to get the inner part of our river worked out with some nice textures, with some nice rocks, with some content like fish and all that stuff to make the scene a bit more realistic. So for that, we just created another biome, which I call Path Inner. And now let me quickly just disable the materials so we can step through everything step by step. Here we go. So if I'm going to enable that Path Inner now, this is going to happen. No worries. The reason is that biome is above the below biome, and it completely overrides it because there's no distribution yet added, or in my case, I have deactivated the path. So to make it possible to tell the system, use the path, but use the inner part of the path. That is done if I'm adding the path here. And if I'm adding another distribution, like the melt distribution, in between, okay? You can see that without the melt, it takes the path itself, not the surrounding right now, it's just the path itself. But we want to go a little bit more inside the river, so we're using the melt. And the melt looks like that if shown in the heat map. So without melt, this would be my path. And with this melt, it looks like this. And now we're telling World Creator, okay, you have another biome. It overlaps the other one, but it's now limited only to these specific areas here inside my path. And to clear that, we're adding directly a pretty nice riverbed material. So just add it. We don't need any sort of distribution because we were telling World Creator, just use everything inside that part. Use this single material. That one looks like that. So I'm setting it up with the same settings here. So we have a much higher tile size in that case because I really like to have larger rocks and all that stuff. So we put that in here. Looks pretty realistic to me. And then we start to adding some objects. It's not much that we actually need to add. I choose to add a rock instances here. So I wanted to have some rocks in the river like that. These are my distributions. I'm just using the Perlin distribution. You see, I don't need to use slope because the river is quite flat here. So just use a Perlin distribution that looks like this. No sub-objects. Then I decided to add some fish. Let me see if you can quickly see that fish here as well. I don't know. We need to check what distribution I used. So I used the sea level for the distribution. So that means the sea level, I don't know if you've seen the Tropical Island Let's Create video. It really told you that the sea level, which is adjusted here under scene, if you scroll down, there you have here the sea level that is used as a distribution, which means everything below the sea level or above the sea level. So this depends what you set up here in the range. So in this case, I'm adding the fish. It should end exactly at the top of the sea level and goes 10 meters below the sea level. Okay, so within that range, we are adding some sort of fish. Let me see if I can find some fish here. I haven't had much fish. Very hard to say. So let me just increase that. So here we got some fish. Okay. Yeah, it's a bit too small right here. Oh, where did you go? Oh, here you go. Oh, they're so small. Okay, so we need to make that. Let me see. Here we go. Here's my fish. Yeah, it's a floating fish in the air. Doesn't really matter. Wow, you're an ugly one, but regardless. Okay, so and now what we could do, because we got the sea level done here, and that's really nice. So what we could do is, if we enable our water, that looks like this. You can see that that fish that we've added is now inside the water. It's not above, it's within the water. See that? Here we go. And each time I'm changing the sea level here dynamically, it tells the system that, okay, the fish should be always exactly below that with a specific value. Where is it? Where is my fish again? Here it is. Okay, let me see. There we go. So it stays beneath the sea level. And that's what I basically wanted to achieve. Yeah. Okay. Now comes the next part, because basically this biome is finished. There's nothing more. So we just added a material. We added some rocks and some fish, and we can control the sea level slightly here. A little bit, maybe like this here would be pretty cool. And well, we'll keep the original level. Yeah. Okay. But now comes the next part. And the next part is, what I want to do is, I want to apply vegetation and all new things like forests and all the trees and all that, surrounding that that path layer basically. So what I do, I'm adding another biome, which I just called everything else. And now let's go through each of these ones. So for that, I'm going first to disable my materials and my objects. So we can go with it. So I will keep the path here and show you what's going to happen. So if I'm disabling it here now, and I'm enabling my everything else. So again, it's going to override everything just as previously because we haven't applied a distribution. If I'm adding a path distribution, it's now, because here we have an invert, it means that it's using the path, but it inverts it. So without the invert, it would be the inner part again. And with the invert, we're going now to the other parts. And that's exactly what I wanted. So everything else except the river itself should be now with that new, filled up with that new biome. And we'll start with materials again. So we're adding a grass leaves, just as we did previously. Let's enable that. We're putting it in. We got the tile size. We don't need to have any distribution because it just should cover the entire terrain. Then we're adding some grass rocks that we did previously. Again, here we are just using a simplex that looks like this to mix it up a little bit. Then we're adding some rocks. For this, we used again the simulation as we did with the very first biome. And on top of it, we're adding some more grass. So the grass here, using a distribution like a purlin, looks like this. So grass not everywhere, just at specific locations like these ones here. So that would be my ground coloring for everything aside the river itself, like that. Now comes the next part. I'm going to add objects. So I again start with grass. So adding grass, let me see. Basically, I'm not using pure grass. I'm using these kind of, I don't know how to say in English. It's like an like plant foliage, something like that. So it looks like without this and with it, it looks like that. And it covers the terrain really nicely. Make it so that you align it along the normal, because it's like a foliage. You don't want to stick that one out of my higher slope base. So if I'm going to not use that file, you can see what's going to happen. It just sticks out like that, and I don't like that. So if I align it, it goes with the terrain's normal, which is just important. Using a different scale range again. I'm using different coloring for that, so it's not 100% everything is exactly with the same colors. I'm adding bushes like this, so it's going to build up. And for that, again here, using some purlin, looks like that. I have added a tree log. Where do we here we go. Like this. And that tree log, again, using a slope distribution here in that case. And I didn't use a purlin or anything else because I was using mostly the instance distance. Because I don't want to have too much, I could easily reduce it by using that instance distance here around it, right? So that makes a lot of sense. And because I really like that, the orange tree log was a bit too, too brownish. So I used a gradient to color it a little bit. And I used some sub-objects like this mushroom here should be around that tree log. And you can see that here, there's no grass, no plants around it. That's because my tree log, or let's say the mushrooms, have an override radius of 8. So if I'm reducing that, you can see that World Creator is adding the plants back. So if that is set to a value, it removes objects that are directly surrounded by these mushrooms in this case. So that way I can control, for example, if a bush should be grown directly within a stone or not. So this is something that could be controlled like that. Then I added some rocks. Where they are, here we got some of these rocks, and those rocks have some sub-objects as well. These would be the settings for my sub-objects at my rock itself. The rock then again use slope and cavity again. Slope, cavity, and my rock settings here. Then I added another rock, a larger one basically. So we got these ones. I think that's that one here. Is it that one? Let me see. Yeah, it is. Having an override radius here again removes everything surrounded by the rock. So we can control that as well. No sub objects for that one, but again slope and a phaser. Then we're adding trees. Whoop. Like this. These are my tree settings. So I'm not using too low distance values again. So the trees should have enough space in between them. I'm using a override radius just to make sure if it's not happening that a tree could ever, spawn directly on a rock or within a rock. Using different scale ranges makes a lot of sense for trees. Also the rotation ranges. That way you can see that we could slightly rotate these trees a little bit. That makes a lot of sense here. I stick them a little bit into the terrain for now. Some trees might have underground things. Oh, we can see here, for example, there's some rocks around the tree. So we could remove these easily like that. Oh, but actually I really like how this looks. What we don't have in World Creator right now, but this is coming as well. Typically trees have a basement, which looks like a basement of, with some larger earth around it. It's not yet in, but we will have this included where every object which is placed on terrain, the terrain will be a little bit elevated upwards. So you have a basement for something like trees, for example. What do we else have here? Don't use align to normal. That makes no sense for trees. And adjusting, this is always depending on the material and if you're using gloss maps or not. In this case, gloss maps are used. So if I enable that, World Creator is interpreting the material differently and uses some gloss or not. So this really depends on the model itself and how you exported it. I don't use gradients, especially specifically for trunks, but for leaves, typically I would use a gradient. If I'm using a gradient like that, we could, for example, just to show you, color the leaves of a tree differently, which might create some really nice things. So I don't use it right now, just leave it empty. Okay, the next one is I'm adding a bit more trees. So a different tree variation basically. It's that one here. And for that one, I'm using some mushrooms here on the ground. So let me see if I can find some here. Here we go. So some of these trees have these sort of mushrooms around him. Really nice, put them in. Having an override radius would make sense, of course. I forget that here. And for the tree, an override radius makes also sense. Not too large instance distance again here. Scale range important, rotation Z range important. Offset it a little bit into the terrain. Adapting coloring for everything that you want to adapt coloring here too. Like for the leaves, I'm using here a gradient to match it a little bit with the other trees. Yeah, and then I'm also adding, lastly, a bush. Let me quickly show you the distributions of that tree. I used for that tree a slope and a purlin. Slope, purlin. And for the bush as well, just the purlin. Yeah, and once this was all set up like that, you are done with your scene. It's full procedural and you can change it anytime. And of course, you could also just make it either smaller, like that one here. Looks really nice. Or go up to 4K. Now you would have a really huge terrain here. And one important thing is if you go to render settings, because you see that noise when I move my camera, this is because I've activated pixel per frame. So if you set it to 1, there's no noise anymore if you're moving the camera. I just do it because sometimes the system might get a little bit laggy. So I'm using this preferably. And there you have also sample rejection threshold, which means that, for example, if you have dark areas like that, you could reduce this like this and you're lighting up the scene a little bit. So this really is a taste, a personal taste, how you liked the render to be. And maximum rendered objects. So you can see there's no objects here at the very far point. This lets you control how World Creator is going to handle the rendering of objects at what distances it should appear, right? So if while moving the camera, you can see that World Creator is now adding detail and detail to that terrain. So this will help also to speed up things on low-end GPUs. If you have a very high powerful GPU, you can easily increase that value. It doesn't really matter. World Creator is just going to create everything that you need to create stunning shots and all that. Okay, well, that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you liked. I hope it helped a lot to understand a few things. And I hope you are aware that whenever you change the paths now, World Creator is going to adapt everything instantly and automatically to your terrain. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and stay safe.